He sat there in silence, hands folded, eyes cold, ego shining brighter than the gold watch on his wrist. A man so wealthy, so connected, so utterly convinced that consequences were for other people, not him. And yet, he had no idea that this hearing, this single morning, would become the day that shattered everything he believed about power. Because just moments before the courtroom doors opened, something happened that forced every person in that building, judges, officers, families, to pause and wonder. What happens when a man with $30 million finally meets a justice system he cannot buy? But before anyone could answer, the double doors swung open, and the man who believed he was untouchable stepped inside. Yet what no one expected was that before this hearing ended, he would look up at the judge, pale and sweating, and whisper the 7 words that would change his life forever. "Please, Your Honor, don't take everything from me. But let's not get ahead of ourselves." Because to understand why the courtroom fell silent that morning, why families held photographs against their hearts, why a judge with 40 years of experience tightened his grip on the bench as if steadying himself, we must go back to the moment when a single file landed on that judge's desk and made his hands tremble. But then something happened that no one expected. It was an ordinary Wednesday morning in Providence. Judges review cases. Clerks shuffle papers. The courthouse buzzes with the usual rhythm of small disputes, traffic violations, family disagreements. Nothing unusual. Then a brown folder, thicker than the rest, was placed carefully on the judge's desk. The name printed on it seemed almost unreal, like something out of a political thriller. Marcus Wellington III versus State of Rhode Island. A family name carved into hospital wings, luxury hotels, political campaigns, charity foundations. A name whispered in boardrooms and private clubs. A name most people only hear when someone wants influence. But this wasn't a civil dispute. This wasn't a tax issue. This wasn't a corporate disagreement. This was criminal. And the very first line inside that file made the judge's chest tighten with grief. Vehicular homicide, Elena Rodriguez, age 8, deceased. For a long moment, he couldn't move. Because when a judge with 4 decades of experience, who has seen everything from petty theft to unthinkable brutality, freezes, you know the story inside. That file carries a weight most people cannot comprehend. But just when the judge thought he'd read the worst of it, something even darker surfaced. The report continued. A family in a small car, parents and their twin daughters, driving home from Rhode Island Hospital. Why were they there? Because 8-year-old Maria, Elena's twin, had completed her final chemotherapy session. After 18 months of fear, hope, prayer, and endless hospital nights, the doctors had finally said the word every parent dreams of: remission. The family celebrated with ice cream. They laughed. Maria, weak but smiling, held her sister's hand. Elena told her softly, "We'll never be apart again." Those 5 words would later haunt the courtroom. The Rodriguez family got into their car, heading home, hearts full of relief and joy. But they never made it. They never even stood a chance. But then the story took a turn no one saw coming. Because while they were driving slowly through downtown Providence, something else was happening on the other side of the city. A Ferrari, bright red, engine roaring, was weaving through traffic at nearly 80 miles per hour in a 30 zone. Behind the wheel, Marcus Wellington IV, 23 years old, blood alcohol level 0.15, cocaine in his system, racing through downtown like he owned the streets. The impact was catastrophic. Elena died instantly. Maria fell into a coma. Their father's spine shattered. Their mother lost her left arm. The kind of pain no amount of time could ever fully heal. But then something happened that changed the case entirely. Because when the Ferrari screeched to a halt, smoke rising, glass everywhere, the young man behind the wheel did not call 911. He did not rush toward the crushed family. He called one person, his father, Marcus Wellington III, a man who believed money could erase anything. And what the father did next would shake the entire justice system. Instead of running to help, instead of trying to save the family, he went into cover-up mode. Before the ambulance arrived, Lawyers were already on the scene, Wellington's lawyers. Before the police could secure evidence, witnesses were being coached. Before the truth could breathe, money was already suffocating it. The judge reading this report knew immediately. This was not just about a crash. It was about corruption, influence, and a wealthy man who treated justice like a game he always won. But just when everyone thought it couldn't get worse, it did. Witnesses came forward. Recordings surfaced. FBI files landed on desks. Bribes offered. Threats made. Evidence tampered with. Officials pressured. Campaign money promised. Investigators hired to dig up dirt on an innocent family. Every page got darker. Every testimony more disturbing. This wasn't just a tragedy. It was a battle between power and principle. A battle that would force the judge to confront the hardest question of his entire career. Can justice truly reach a man who believes he's above the law? But then came the moment no one expected, the moment that began everything. The bailiff opened the doors. The courtroom fell silent, and in walked Marcus Wellington III. $40 million net worth. Custom suit. Gold watch. A legal team worth more than most homes. He didn't look nervous. He didn't look ashamed. He looked annoyed, as if the court had inconvenienced him. And that's what happened. He leaned toward his attorney, smirked, and whispered just loud enough for the room to hear. "This court can't touch me." People gasped. Even the officers shifted uncomfortably. But the judge, he simply closed the file, removed his glasses, and stared at the man who believed he was untouchable. Because what Wellington didn't know was this. The moment he spoke those 6 arrogant words, he didn't challenge a courtroom. He challenged justice itself. And justice was about to answer. But then something happened that no one expected, and that is where this story truly begins. A wealthy man, a grieving family, a judge who had seen too much loss to tolerate arrogance, a courtroom full of silence, tension, and truth waiting to be revealed. The next hours would expose secrets, reveal lies, test loyalties, and ultimately deliver a moment so powerful, so unforgettable, that every person present would remember it for the rest of their lives. Because by the end of this hearing, the man who said, "This court can't touch me," would walk out in handcuffs, and the judge would show him, slowly, calmly, firmly, exactly how justice touches those who believe they stand above it. The courtroom had barely settled when the weight of the moment began pressing against every wall, every bench, every heart in the room. The Wellington name floated through the air like a shadow, expensive, polished, rehearsed. But beneath that shine, something darker curled quietly, waiting to be exposed. Judge Caprio sat behind the bench, hands folded, shoulders still as stone. He had read the entire file. He had seen the photographs of the crushed vehicle. He had listened to the emergency call replayed over and over. But what struck him the most was the first page of the victim's statement. "We were just driving home. We thought the worst was over." 8 words that carried more pain than most people feel in a lifetime. Across the room, Sofia Rodriguez sat with her remaining daughter, Maria. Sofia's left sleeve hung loose, empty. Her right hand held Maria's tightly. Though Maria looked distant, her eyes clouded by the remnants of trauma. Their family, once whole, once joyful, now sat broken, and the man responsible for orchestrating the cover-up stood only a few feet away, adjusting his expensive cufflinks. But something happened that no one in that courtroom expected. When the clerk announced the case officially, a quiet gasp came from the gallery. It wasn't the charges. Everyone knew this trial would involve bribery, coercion, obstruction. It was the number of names listed on the docket. 9 witnesses, 3 FBI agents, 2 medical professionals, for local business owners, 1 translator. This wasn't going to be a simple hearing. This was going to be a reckoning. Even Wellington's lawyers glanced nervously at the list. They had prepared for negotiations, not war. Judge Caprio wasn't a man easily shaken. 40 years in the courtroom had taught him that justice often walks slowly, but she always arrives. He had sentenced murderers, forgiven single parents who made mistakes, and helped struggling families find footing. But this one was different. Because the man standing before him wasn't just accused of wrongdoing. He was accused of trying to buy his family's way out of responsibility, while another family watched their daughter die. Judge Caprio knew immediately that this wasn't just a legal case. It was a moral one. Marcus Wellington III, the father, didn't simply walk into the courtroom. He entered like he owned the building. His suit was tailored so sharply that the seams seemed to cut the air. His shoes gleamed like polished obsidian. His posture carried the confidence of a man who had always assumed the world bent to his will. Behind him stood his son, Marcus IV. You might expect guilt on the young man's face. You might expect remorse. You might expect tears. But what you saw instead was something unsettling. Detachment. The expression of someone who still didn't fully grasp the devastation he'd caused. You could almost hear the unspoken message in the way he stood. My father will fix this. On the opposite side of the courtroom sat the Rodriguez family, or what was left of it. Sophia, pale and exhausted, held the photograph of Elena against her chest. The little girl in the picture was smiling, missing a front tooth, her hair tied with matching pink ribbons. A face full of innocence. Beside her sat Miguel's brothers. Miguel himself could not attend. His back injuries had left him unable to walk without assistance. His family arrived in his place, carrying his trembling statement inside an envelope. And in the front row, gripping a stuffed toy rabbit, sat Maria, the surviving twin. Every few minutes, she looked toward her mother, then toward the judge, then toward the photograph of her sister, never quite understanding why the empty seat beside her would never again be occupied. The room felt her presence deeply. Every juror, every officer, even Wellington's lawyers looked briefly uncomfortable. And then there were the witnesses. People who had every reason to stay quiet, but chose to speak. The valet, Carlos Santos, who saw the Ferrari fishtail out of the parking garage. The waiter, Tommy Martinez, who remembered the slurred speech and erratic behavior. Nurse Patricia Williams, who watched Wellington attempt to manipulate a translator while the victims lay dying behind hospital curtains. Detective Murphy, who had been offered a bribe disguised as a consulting opportunity. Maria Gonzalez, the translator who burst into tears when describing Wellington's attempt to blame the tragedy on older vehicles. None of them were wealthy, none of them powerful, none of them connected, but they had something far more valuable in a courtroom: integrity. But then something happened that tilted the entire room onto its axis. The prosecutor stood, adjusting his tie. Your Honor, he said calmly, the state is prepared to present evidence that Mr. Wellington attempted to obstruct justice, silence witnesses, manipulate official records, influence elected officials, and intimidate a family in their darkest hour. The judge nodded. Wellington smirked, but the smirk vanished the moment the prosecutor said, We'll begin by introducing the victims. A hush swept across the courtroom. Everyone leaned forward. Even the cameras from the press lowered quietly. Sofia Rodriguez stood slowly. Her legs shook. Maria clung to her mother's side. And in Sofia's trembling hand, the photograph of Elena caught the light like a small sun. Judge Caprio leaned forward, not as a judge now, but as a father, a grandfather, a human being. Mrs. Rodriguez, he said gently, you may speak when you're ready. The testimony that silenced the world. The courtroom waited. Sophia opened her mouth, but no words came. Only tears. She breathed in, tried again. My daughters. Her voice cracked. My daughters always held hands. From the day they were born, they never let go of each other. Maria tugged softly at her mother's sleeve, resting her head against her side. But that night, Sophia continued, one of them didn't come home. The gallery sniffled. Even reporters lowered their cameras. Sophia's eyes shifted toward Wellington, and the room froze. When your people came to the hospital, she whispered, my husband was unconscious. My daughter was in a coma. My arm had just been taken, and you stood there, asking us to sign silence. The judge's jaw tightened. Wellington's lawyers shifted uneasily. Maria looked confused, too young to fully understand, yet old enough to feel the weight of her sister's absence. And when I said no, Sophia said, You told the translator that tragedies like this happen in neighborhoods like ours, as if my daughter's life was a price we should accept. Her fingers gripped the photo of Elena so tightly that her knuckles turned white. Across the courtroom, the wealthy businessman finally looked away. But then something happened no one expected. Sophia reached in her purse and pulled out a small ribbon, pink and frayed at the ends. Elena wore this the night she died, she said quietly. It fell beside the car. The police handed it to me. It was all I had left that wasn't covered in blood. Silence hit the room like a wave. Even Wellington's son blinked, perhaps for the first time feeling a touch of reality. The judge leaned back, overwhelmed. This wasn't just a legal case anymore. This was humanity. The question that split the courtroom in two. After a moment, the prosecutor stepped forward gently. Mrs. Rodriguez, what do you want from the court today? She took a long breath, tears falling freely. I want my daughter back, she whispered. But I cannot have that. She turned her gaze toward Wellington. What I want is for my daughter's life to mean something. More than money, more than influence, more than the cost of a man's wine collection. The judge closed his eyes briefly, absorbing the weight of her words. When he opened them again, the determination in his expression was unmistakable. A storm was coming. But then something happened that neither side expected. The prosecutor continued. And now, Your Honor, the state will present evidence suggesting Mr. Wellington attempted to influence law enforcement. Murmurs spread. Wellington shifted uncomfortably. His attorneys straightened their papers, suddenly anxious. Detective Murphy approached the stand. A man with 22 years of experience, hardened by street crime, hardened by violence. Yet his hands trembled when he held the sworn statement. He cleared his throat. Your Honor, I've arrested murderers, traffickers, gang members, but I have never seen the kind of boldness I saw in this man. He pointed, not dramatically, but with heavy sincerity, toward Wellington. He told me, in his own home, that the right incentive could make evidence disappear. Gasps, shock, a shifting of bodies. Wellington's jaw clenched. His lawyers scribbled frantically. And the judge didn't blink. Because now, the conflict wasn't just emotional. It was official, documented, recorded, and ready to explode. But then something happened that would define the rest of this trial. Detective Murphy held up a small audio device. This recording, he said, captures the defendant offering me a financial incentive to misplace the Ferrari's black box data. The gallery froze. Wellington's face drained of color. His son looked at him in disbelief. Judge Caprio's eyes darkened, not with anger, but with disappointment so deep it chilled the room. Detective, the judge said quietly, please play the recording. He pressed the button. Wellington's voice filled the courtroom like smoke. Remove the data, and I'll make it worth your while. A collective shudder ran through the audience. The judge leaned forward. His expression hardened. This court, he said solemnly, has now seen the first glimpse of the truth. The recording ended, but its echo lingered in the courtroom like a storm cloud refusing to move. For several seconds, no one breathed. No one shifted. No one dared to break the silence that had fallen like a hammer. Detective Murphy lowered the device, his hands trembling, not from fear, but from a memory of what it felt like when a wealthy man looked him in the eye and believed he could purchase his integrity. He stepped away from the stand slowly, each footstep measured, the weight of the moment pressing down on his shoulders. Judge Caprio watched him with quiet respect. Men like Murphy were the backbone of true justice, unbought, unshaken, unwilling to trade honor for money. But across the courtroom, Marcus Wellington III sat rigid, jaw locked, eyes burning with disbelief that the recording had made it into evidence. And before anyone could compose themselves. But then something happened that no one in the courtroom expected. His son, Marcus Wellington IV, leaned forward and whispered sharply into his father's ear. No one could hear the words, but everyone could see the fury in the young man's expression. Because for the first time, the son seemed to realize that his father's confidence might not be enough to save him. A reporter in the gallery whispered, "He looks terrified." And he did. because the arrogance that carried him into that courtroom had begun to crumble under the pressure of reality. The prosecutor's move. The prosecutor stood again, holding a folder so filled with papers it looked ready to burst. "Your Honor," he said, "the state now calls Tommy Martinez to the stand." The waiter, the man who served the Wellington boy the night of the crash, walked slowly toward the witness chair. His hands fidgeted. His eyes darted nervously around the room. You could tell this was a man not used to courtrooms. Judge Caprio offered him a gentle nod, a silent reassurance that truth does not require wealth, only courage. Tommy took a seat. "Mr. Martinez," the prosecutor began, "can you tell the court what you witnessed the night of the collision?" Tommy swallowed, then spoke in a trembling voice. The young man, Marcus, the son, was drunk. Very drunk. Slurring words. Laughing loudly. His friends kept trying to calm him down. He staggered on the way to the restroom. He paused, breath shaking. And when I told him I could call him a cab, he said that his family owns half the city, and he doesn't need to listen to minimum wage nobodies. A ripple of discomfort moved across the gallery. But just as the courtroom absorbed that statement, something even more shocking came next. Tommy reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded slip of paper. "This," he said softly, "was delivered to my apartment 2 days after the crash." The bailiff took it and handed it to the judge. It was a check, made out of Tommy, signed by Wellington. Amount, $25,000. Memo line, hospital recovery assistance. But behind that polite phrase, everyone knew the truth. It was hush money. Judge Caprio looked up slowly. "Mr. Martinez," he asked, "were you injured?" Tommy shook his head. "No, Your Honor." "Then why would Mr. Wellington offer you $25,000? Tommy's voice broke, because he wanted me to say Marcus looked sober. He said if I helped their family would help me. The gallery gasped. Wellington's lawyers stood abruptly. "Objection, hearsay." But the judge didn't respond immediately. He set the check down gently. Then he spoke, voice low, steady, and dangerous. "I will allow it." Tension tightens, and then snaps. The prosecutor wasn't finished. "Your Honor, the state now calls Carlos Santos to the stand. The valet, a man with tired eyes and the posture of someone who works 2 jobs to support a family. He took the oath, sat, and folded his hands. Mr. Santos," the prosecutor asked, "can you tell the court what happened the night of the crash?" Carlos inhaled deeply. When a young man, Marcus 4, got into the Ferrari, he nearly hit a parked car in the garage. I tried to take his keys. I begged him not to drive. And then, the prosecutor asked gently. Carlos closed his eyes. He laughed, said his father could buy the police department if he wanted. The gallery murmured. But then, Carlos opened his eyes and added something that froze the blood of every person in the room. And the night after the crash, Mr. Wellington came to my apartment. The prosecutor nodded. And what did he want? Carlos swallowed hard. He offered me $10,000 cash if I signed a paper saying the Ferrari left the garage safely without any swerving. Did you sign it? The prosecutor asked. Carlos looked straight into the judge's eyes. No, Your Honor. I would not lie about a dead child. A wave of emotion rolled through the courtroom. Wellington stiffened. His lawyers whispered frantically. His son looked pale. And Judge Caprio, he looked heartbroken because every new testimony revealed the same story. A wealthy man who tried to bury the truth beneath layers of money. But then something happened that changed the direction of the trial entirely. The prosecutor lifted a new folder. Your Honor, the state calls Nurse Patricia Williams to the stand. A tall woman with silver hair and gentle eyes approached. She moved slowly, the weight of what she was about to say hanging on her shoulders. Ms. Williams, the prosecutor began, you were working in the ICU the night the Rodriguez family was brought in? Yes, she said softly. What did you observe? She took a breath, steady but trembling underneath. As the family was receiving emergency care, a man arrived, well-dressed, confident, pushy. She pointed toward Wellington. That man. A murmur stirred the room. What did he do? The prosecutor continued. Nurse Williams swallowed. He asked the translator, He wanted her to convince the family to sign forms, legal forms, while the mother was in surgery, while the father was unconscious. The judge's face hardened. "And did he offer anything?" the prosecutor asked. Nurse Williams nodded. He said he could ease their financial burden if they helped resolve the issue quietly. Gasps, disbelief, shaking heads. But then, just when the courtroom thought it had heard the worst, the most painful twist arrived. The prosecutor cleared his throat. "Your Honor, the state now calls Maria Gonzalez, the hospital translator." The young woman walked slowly toward the stand, her eyes red, her shoulders shaking. As she sat down, she clasped her hands tightly, as if holding them together kept her from falling apart. "Ms. Gonzalez," the prosecutor said gently, "you were present when Mr. Wellington spoke to the Rodriguez family?" "Yes," she whispered. "What did he say?" Her voice cracked. "He told Miguel, the father, who couldn't even move, that accidents happen in neighborhoods like yours." The gallery gasped. Tears welled in Maria's eyes. "He said the family car was old, and maybe that contributed to the crash. He said he could offer $50,000 to resolve the matter quietly." Silence hit the room like thunder. Then she added something that made the judge close his eyes in pain. "He said little girls heal faster than people think." Half the room broke into soft cries. The other half sat frozen, horrified. And Wellington? He looked at the floor. For the first time, he looked ashamed. But then the tension rose again, sharper than before. The prosecutor stepped back. "Your Honor, the state has one final witness before breaking." Judge Caprio nodded stiffly. "The court calls Dr. Jennifer Kim, a respected trauma surgeon, a woman known for calm under pressure. But today, she looked deeply disturbed. She took the stand and spoke clearly. The Rodriguez family suffered severe trauma. But the part that haunts me is what happened 2 days after the crash." "What happened, doctor?" the prosecutor asked. She exhaled shakily. "I received a call from a medical expert. He said he'd been hired by Mr. Wellington to review Maria's cancer treatment records." Gasps. Judge Caprio leaned forward because he wanted to prove that the girl's previous chemotherapy made her more susceptible to brain injury, and therefore the crash wasn't entirely their fault. The courtroom erupted. Shouts, cries, outrage. Even the officers had to step forward to restore order. The judge's breaking point, a silent, boiling fury. Judge Caprio raised his hand. Silence fell instantly. He looked at the doctor, then at the translator, then at Sophia and Maria. Then, slowly, purposefully, he turned his gaze toward Wellington. His voice was soft, but carried the force of a storm about to break. "Mr. Wellington," he said, "this court is beginning to see a pattern." Wellington's eyes flickered. Arrogance faltered. Fear began to take its place. Because everything he had built, his money, his influence, his connections, was unraveling before him, and justice was closing in. But then something happened that shifted the entire trial onto a knife's edge. The prosecutor lifted one final piece of evidence. A recording. Another one. "Your Honor," he said, "this is the call Mr. Wellington made to Councilman Roberts." Wellington's eyes widened. His lawyer stood. "Objection." But the judge held up a hand. "Play it." The recording filled the courtroom. A contribution of $100,000 should help this matter be handled quietly, through administrative channels. No need for criminal charges. The room erupted in disbelief. This wasn't arrogance anymore. This wasn't entitlement. This was corruption. Clear, cold, documented. And the judge now saw the full picture. A wealthy man using every advantage, every connection, every dollar, to silence a grieving family and protect his son from accountability. The tension had risen to its peak. Every witness had spoken. Every lie had been uncovered. Every layer of influence had been stripped away. And the courtroom sat on the edge of the moment that would determine everything. The courtroom felt different now. Heavier, tighter, as if the air itself had learned the truth and was refusing to let anyone breathe comfortably until justice was served. The last recording had barely finished echoing through the speakers when the entire room slipped into stunned silence. Even those who had suspected corruption Even those who believed wealth often bends the rules. Even they hadn't expected this level of manipulation, arrogance, and moral rot. Wellington, 3, sat frozen at the defense table. The confident posture was gone. The smug expression had evaporated. He looked smaller now, not physically, but in the way a man shrinks when the world finally sees who he really is. But while the courtroom tried to process everything, something else, something unexpected, began to build beneath the surface. Something about to erupt. But then something happened that no one expected. The judge's gavel struck once, firm but trembling with emotion. "Mr. Wellington," he said quietly, "please stand." The wealthy businessman rose to his feet slowly, like a man stepping onto thin ice. Beside him, his son shifted nervously. It was the first time since entering the courtroom that the young man looked truly afraid. Judge Caprio stared at Wellington for a long moment, not as a judge analyzing a defendant, but as a human being witnessing a tragedy unfold. The tragedy of a life corrupted by arrogance and unchecked power. At last, the judge spoke. "This court has now heard testimony from 9 witnesses, 3 medical experts, and multiple law enforcement officials. All of them describe not only a terrible crime, but a calculated effort to bury that crime." The gallery sat perfectly still. Sofia Rodriguez squeezed Maria's hand. Maria leaned against her mother, eyes wide, sensing something major was coming. The fuse reaches the fire. The prosecutor stepped forward one final time. "Your Honor," he said, holding up a thick bundle of papers. "These are sworn affidavits from every witness who refused Mr. Wellington's bribes. Signed, dated, verified." He set the stack on the evidence table with a heavy thud that echoed through the courtroom like a drumbeat of truth. But the real explosion came from somewhere no one expected. The judge leaned slightly forward. "Mr. Wellington," he said softly, "is there anything you wish to say before we proceed?" His attorney whispered urgently. "No comment. No comment. Saying nothing." But arrogance dies slowly, and sometimes it refuses to die until it destroys everything around it. Wellington inhaled, lifted his chin, and spoke. And his words dropped like a grenade. "This entire courtroom has misunderstood my intentions," he said. "I was simply trying to protect my family." A few people gasped. A few shook their heads in disbelief. But he continued, "And if the Rodriguez family had accepted my offer, none of this would be happening. They chose, willfully chose, a harder path." Judge Caprio's eyes widened. The prosecutor froze mid-step. Sophia covered her mouth with both hands. And then, the breaking point finally, truly arrived. But then something happened that turned the entire courtroom upside down. A sound rose from the gallery. Not a gasp, not a shout. It was a deep, trembling cry. Maria, the surviving twin, had stood up. She was shaking. Her small hands clutched Elena's photograph. Tears streamed down her cheeks. "Harder path," she whispered, voice cracking. "You think we chose this?" The courtroom froze. Wellington turned around, startled. The judge leaned forward, stunned. Sophia tried to reach for her daughter, but Maria stepped out of her grasp. Her small shoes echoed on the courtroom floor as she approached the front. She held the photo of Elena up toward Wellington, her hand trembling, her voice trembling more. "My sister died," she cried. "She died because your son, because he thought he was a big man in a fast car." Tears poured freely now. "And you came to the hospital, and you told my mom that girls like us get hurt in places like our neighborhood." A wave of shock rolled through the courtroom. Even the defense attorney looked horrified. "And now," Maria whispered, "you say we chose the hard path? We didn't choose anything. You chose for us. You chose money. And my sister, she didn't get to choose anything." Her voice broke completely. She didn't even get to grow up. A sob broke from the gallery. Someone whispered, "Oh, dear God." Even the court officers turned away, wiping their eyes. Judge Caprio's hands shook as he reached for a tissue. He had seen grief. He had seen anger. He had seen tragedy. But he had never seen an 8-year-old girl speak truth with such brutal, heartbreaking simplicity. Maria's mother hurried forward, wrapping her in her one remaining arm, pulling her close. "Shoo, mi amor, shoo," she whispered, her own tears falling. The courtroom was no longer just a room. It was a wound, wide open, pulsing with the truth of a family shattered. And then, but just when the tension could not rise any higher, it did. Because the judge slowly rose to his feet, a sight no one expected. Even the prosecutors looked startled. Judge Caprio rarely stood during hearings. He reserved it only for moments of profound moral weight. He looked at Maria, then at Sophia, then back at Wellington. And when he spoke, his voice was low, steady, and filled with something deeper than authority, something closer to righteous grief. "Mr. Wellington," he said, "I want you to look at this child." The wealthy businessman turned hesitantly. He met Maria's tear-filled eyes for the first time, and something shifted in him. For the first time, his arrogance faltered. Judge Caprio continued, "This little girl has endured more pain in 8 years than you have in your entire life. Not because of fate, not because of accidents, but because of choices, your son's choices, your money's choices." The silence was suffocating. "You didn't protect your family," the judge said. "You protected your power. And now, the truth has stripped that power away." Wellington's face crumbled. His shoulders sagged. He looked suddenly older, deflated, defeated. But the moment wasn't over. Not yet, because the judge wasn't finished. The turning point, no escape left. Judge Caprio leaned both hands on the bench. "For 40 years," he said, voice trembling, "I have tried to balance justice with mercy. I have forgiven those who were humble, guided those who were lost, and protected those who had no voice." His eyes never left Wellington. "But you, sir, didn't just break the law." He paused. "You tried to break the truth." The crowd held its breath. "You tried to bury a child's life with your money. You tried to silence her parents' grief. You tried to turn witnesses into accessories. You tried to corrupt this system that protects the innocent." Wellington's jaw quivered. "And worst of all," the judge whispered, "you made this little girl," he motioned toward Maria, "relive her sister's death here today." The wealthy businessman's eyes filled with tears. But tears did not matter here. The truth already had. But then something happened that sealed Wellington's fate completely. The judge looked toward the bailiffs. "Please bring forward Exhibit 47. A large monitor was wheeled forward. The prosecutor plugged in a USB drive. "This," he said quietly, "is the traffic camera footage from the moment of impact." Half the courtroom flinched. Sophia closed her eyes. Maria turned and buried her face into her mother's side. The judge hesitated, pained to show it, but needing the truth to be undeniable. "Play it," he said. The screen flickered. A quiet street appeared. A family car turned slowly through an intersection. Then, in less than a second, a red blur tore across the frame and slammed into them. A sound went through the courtroom. A gasp, a cry, a collective breaking of hearts. Miguel's brothers sobbed openly. Reporters wiped their eyes. Even a defense attorney choked back emotion. And then, the screen froze on the final image. Elena's ribbon, caught in the headlights of the next car. Judge Caprio lowered his head. The breaking point had been reached. There was no going back. Not with money. Not with influence. Not with any amount of power. The final blow, delivered by the victims. The judge inhaled deeply and addressed the Rodriguez family. "If there is anything more you wish to tell this court, you may speak." Miguel's written statement was handed to the judge. He unfolded it slowly. The handwriting was shaky. The words simple. "Your Honor, I cannot walk anymore. My wife cannot hold things anymore. My daughter cannot sleep without nightmares. And my other daughter cannot live anymore. We do not want revenge. We want truth. We want dignity. We want our child to matter." The judge's voice cracked as he finished reading. He folded the letter with gentle hands and placed it beside Elena's photograph. The room braced itself. The breaking point had arrived, and what came next would determine everything. The courtroom was silent in a way that felt unnatural, like the quiet found in the eye of a storm just seconds before everything breaks apart. No one moved. No one spoke. Even the lights seemed to hum more softly, as if they too understood the gravity of the moment. Judge Caprio sat perfectly still for several long seconds, hands clasped together, face pale with emotion. Before him lay a stack of evidence thick enough to rival a dictionary. Photographs stained with tears, statements made with shaking hands, recordings that stripped away every lie. And at the very top of that pile, Elena's small pink ribbon, worn, frayed, and heartbreakingly innocent. And right across from him stood Marcus Wellington III, the man who once strutted into the courtroom believing he owned the air people breathed. Now his shoulders sagged, his hands trembled. His expensive suit suddenly looked like an ill-fitting costume on a man who no longer recognized himself. But the judge's focus was not on Wellington's collapse. It was on justice. But then something happened that no one expected. Instead of speaking immediately, Judge Caprio slowly stood up. A gasp rippled through the courtroom. Judges do not stand lightly. They do not stand casually. They stand only when the weight of what they're about to say cannot be delivered sitting down. And so, when he rose, every single person felt the shift. Even Wellington flinched. Even his attorneys straightened as though bracing for impact. Even the court officers looked uneasy. Judge Caprio gently touched the pink ribbon on his desk, then lifted his gaze. "Everyone, please rise." The entire courtroom stood. Every witness, every reporter, every member of the Rodriguez family. Even a young prosecutor swallowed hard. But Wellington, he rose as if dragged by an invisible force, pulling him toward truth he had avoided all his life. The judge speaks, slowly, carefully, powerfully. Judge Caprio began. "This court does not exist to punish people for being wealthy. It does not exist to shame people for success. It exists for one purpose, to uphold justice equally for all." He paused. "And for too long, Mr. Wellington, you believed that justice was not something you were required to stand before. You believed it was something you could purchase." A few heads nodded softly. Someone whispered, "That's true." Sophia covered her mouth. The judge continued, "I have heard your lawyers argue that your intentions were misunderstood. I have heard you claim that your actions were meant to protect your family. But protecting your family does not require destroying someone else's." The tension was unbearable. But the worst part, the judge said, voice trembling, is that at no point, until this very moment, did you ever express genuine remorse for the family whose lives were shattered. The courtroom shifted uneasily. Wellington blinked rapidly. He looked desperate, almost pleading, but he did not speak. Because now, he knew speaking would not save him. Nothing would. But then something happened that sent chills down every spine. Judge Caprio placed both hands on the bench. He slowly lifted Elena's photograph. A tiny girl, smiling through missing teeth. A child who loved ice cream. A child who celebrated her sister's remission mere minutes before tragedy struck. A child whose voice would never again echo through a playground or whisper goodnight to her twin sister. The judge held the photograph toward Wellington, his voice breaking as he spoke. "This is the life your son took. This is the child you tried to dismiss as a complication. This is the soul whose memory you tried to bury beneath your wealth." Tears streamed across the faces in the gallery. Even court officers lowered their heads. Wellington clasped his shaking hands, finally unable to look away. And then, but what happened next was even more unexpected. Judge Caprio lifted Miguel's letter, written in trembling handwriting. He read aloud, "We do not want revenge. We want dignity. We want our child to matter." The words hung in the air like a prayer, or a plea, or both. The judge closed the letter gently, with a reverence usually reserved for sacred texts, delivering judgment, a moment that feels like history. "Mr. Wellington," the judge began, "you are charged with multiple counts of bribery, witness tampering, intimidation, and obstruction of justice. Your son is separately charged with vehicular homicide and reckless endangerment." Wellington swallowed hard. His son trembled. The judge continued, "In my 40 years on the bench, I have seen terrible things. But I cannot recall a time when a man used his wealth in such a blatant, cruel, and systematic attempt to escape responsibility. He inhaled slowly, and I cannot recall a family who showed such dignity, courage, and grace in the face of unimaginable loss. Everyone leaned forward. They knew the moment had come, the moment that would echo far beyond that courtroom. The judge's voice deepened. For your crimes, for your arrogance, for your attempt to corrupt this court, and for your utter disregard for the suffering of the Rodriguez family, this court sentences you to— The courtroom held its breath. Even time seemed to pause. 5 years in federal prison, without parole. A collective gasp swept the room. One of Wellington's attorneys staggered slightly. Maria clutched her mother's side. But the judge wasn't finished. In addition, you will forfeit $10 million to a victim compensation fund that will serve families harmed by drunk drivers and corruption. A reporter whispered, $10 million? My God! Again, the judge continued. You will receive no special treatment. You will serve among the general population. You will not buy your way into comfort. Wellington's face drained of color. But the sentence wasn't over. Judge Caprio turned toward the young Wellington. Your son is not on trial before me today, he said. But his actions, and your response to those actions, are the reason we stand here. He paused. His fate will be decided by another court. But know this. Your interference nearly cost that young man the chance to learn responsibility. The father covered his face. The son wiped tears. The gallery sat mesmerized. But then something happened that no one expected again. Judge Caprio stepped down from the bench, walked toward the Rodriguez family, and stood directly before them. Very few judges do this. Even fewer do it during sentencing. But this was no ordinary case. He spoke softly. Mrs. Rodriguez, your daughter mattered. Your family matters. And today, justice honors her memory. Sophia broke into tears, covering her mouth. Maria clung to her mother. The entire gallery wept silently. Then the judge turned to the bailiffs. Take Mr. Wellington into custody. The wealthy businessman looked up, hands trembling, breath shaking, face hollow. He whispered one final plea. Your Honor, please, don't take everything from me. But the judge's reply was firm. You lost everything the moment you tried to buy your way out of accountability. The bailiffs approached, and for the first time in his life, the man who said this court can't touch me was touched by justice. Handcuffs clicked around his wrists. His shoulders slumped. His head bowed. As he was escorted out, the entire courtroom watched quietly, not with cruelty, not with triumph, but with the solemn understanding that justice had been done. The moment Marcus Wellington III was escorted out in handcuffs, the courtroom felt like it exhaled for the first time in weeks. It was a quiet, solemn release, not of celebration, but of relief. The tension that had gripped every heart softened into something heavier, more profound. Justice had been served. For the Rodriguez family, it wasn't a victory in headlines or numbers. It was validation that their grief, their pain, and their loss had mattered. Finally, Elena's life was honored. Sofia Rodriguez, still trembling from the trial, held her surviving daughter Maria close. The girl's small frame leaned against her mother's chest, comforted by the steady beat of a heart that had endured so much. Their eyes met briefly, full of silent understanding. Elena's absence left a gaping hole, but together they stood strong. Judge Caprio, observing the quiet scene, saw more than resilience. He saw courage, dignity, and a lesson in humanity that transcended the courtroom walls. But then something happened that no one expected. As the Rodriguez family prepared to leave, an elderly woman approached cautiously. She held a small pink ribbon in her hand, the same color Elena had loved. With a gentle voice, she whispered, I found this on the courthouse steps. Your sister's spirit will always be with you. Maria clutched it tightly, feeling a warmth she hadn't felt since that tragic night. Sophia's tears fell freely, but this time they were mixed with gratitude. For a moment, the world outside the courtroom seemed to pause, honoring a life lost, a family surviving, and a justice that had prevailed. The ribbon became a symbol, a quiet emblem of hope, memory, and perseverance. For Maria, It represented the promise that even after tragedy, love endures. And for Sophia, it confirmed that standing firm in truth and rejecting bribery, manipulation, and intimidation could bring profound justice. The long road to healing. Life didn't magically return to normal. It never would. But slowly, it found a new rhythm. Miguel, recovering from shattered spine, regained enough strength to work. Sophia, mastering her prosthetic arm, returned to volunteer work, helping other families affected by drunk driving. Maria, emerging from months of therapy, began to sleep peacefully again, comforted by dreams in which Elena reassured her she was never alone. The community, inspired by their courage, rallied around them. Little acts, meals, kind words, flowers, and support created a network of love that no wealth could ever buy. The Victim Compensation Fund, created from Wellington's forfeited $10 million, became a lifeline for other families facing injustice or tragedy. 37 families, many crushed by medical bills and exploitation, received relief. Justice, it seemed, had ripple effects far beyond one courtroom, far beyond one family. It transformed lives and restored faith in a system that so often seemed stacked against ordinary people. But then something happened that brought the story full circle. 2 years later, Judge Caprio received a letter from Miguel Rodriguez. Carefully written in painstaking English, it spoke of healing, resilience, and hope. Judge Caprio, your courtroom reminded us that no one is untouchable. Not wealth, not influence, not power. Wellington's punishment didn't bring Elena back, but it proved that justice can reach those who believe they are above the law. My family's life is rebuilding. We honor Elena every day. Thank you for showing the world that dignity and truth still matter. The words hit deeper than any commendation or award. They reminded the judge, and all of us, that the ultimate purpose of justice isn't headlines or recognition. It is restoring the voice and dignity of those who have been silenced at a gathering of remembrance. On a rainy spring afternoon, Judge Caprio attended a small gathering at the Rodriguez home. The family planted a tree in Elena's memory, a young, fragile tree growing steadily, nurtured with care and love. Maria held a pink ribbon, a symbol she never let go of. The judge knelt to her level and whispered, "I will remember her. Always." Tears mingled with smiles as the family embraced him, feeling whole not because tragedy had vanished, but because dignity had been restored. The event was more than memorial. It was a living lesson in courage, compassion, and the transformative power of justice. Friends, neighbors, and volunteers surrounded the family, each bringing love and affirmation that no one stands alone in the fight for truth. Final moral reflections. The story of the Rodriguez family and Wellington teaches timeless lessons. Wealth cannot buy conscience. Power cannot escape truth. A family's grief is sacred and deserves protection. Justice is measured by the dignity it restores, not the riches it punishes. Even the smallest voice matters the most. Elena's ribbon fluttered in the wind, not as a symbol of tragedy, but of courage, justice, and unbroken love. It reminds us all that the smallest life can inspire the greatest change. High retention, SEO, optimize CTA. If this story moved you, don't just watch, be part of the conversation. Hit like to honor Elena's memory, subscribe for more real courtroom justice stories, and share this video to remind the world that no one is above the law. Comment below with your thoughts. Whose courage inspired you the most in this case? Stay with us till the end of every story, because every minute brings justice, lessons, and hope you won't find anywhere else.